Hello, everyone, and welcome to the final session of Cactus's SSK conference. So that was stay home, stay safe, keep learning. And we hope you've learned a lot over the last 2 days. It's my pleasure to host the final session, where we're going to be looking at the confluence of preprints, AI, and editorial workflows, and in particular, how the process of reviewing articles and manuscripts can be affected by the growth in popularity of preprints and AI. I have a very erudite panel to join me today. Unfortunately, one of our panel members, Richard Sever, has had to withdraw late in the day, but I'm sure we'll be able to have a great session in any case, and we'll be able to explore some of these issues which will be affecting scholarly communication in the next 5 years. So the format of this session will be, I'm going to introduce each of my co-panelists. I will then present a few slides on where I see preprints AI and the peer review process coming together over the next few years. And then each of the panelists will have a viewpoint on that. And then we have some conversations around each of those answers. And then finally, we'd like to save some time at the end to answer some of your questions. So please use the chat window and ask questions, make observations. We'll be happy to answer those questions at the end. Also, please share any learnings you make or any observations, any surprises on Twitter using the hashtag up there, SSK Virtual. We'd love to see your comments up there. So without any more ado, I'm going to introduce my co-panelists. Now, of course, it's been a strange few months for almost everyone in the world. We've probably all spent more time at home than we were ever expecting to. And we've probably had to learn some new skills, particularly in my case, in the kitchen. So while I ask everyone to introduce themselves, I'm also going to ask you, what kitchen gadget have you made friends with over the last 8 weeks or so? So let's see how this goes. So I'm going to introduce myself first. So I'm Christopher. I'm the Director of Products and Strategy at Cactus Communications. I've been here for 12 months now. And I have a background kind of at the interface of editorial and technology roles throughout scholarly publishing. I've been involved with preprints. I've been involved with subscription journals, open access journals, the book series that we're all familiar with 20 years ago. But I think the most exciting time in scholarly communications about to happen over the next 10 years, rather than the last 300 or 350. And I would say what I've learned over the last 8 weeks is I make great pasta with the help of the pasta machine. I can make very nice vegetable ravioli. So it hasn't been a complete negative these last few months. I'm going to pass this over now to Alberto.
Thank you, Chris. And thank you, everyone, for joining this panel. All right, a little bit about myself. I'll try and keep it as brief as possible. I have background in academic research, computer science, and astrophysics. And after spending many years with my PhD, postdoc, and research work, I like to call myself a recovering academic. I then switched over to starting a company, Authorea, which was then acquired by Adipon a couple of years ago, and I'm now with Adipon. And I think that the most interesting and relevant project and initiative that I'm working on for today's discussion is the under review workflow, which is a workflow by which we are putting the option to preprint in front of authors that are submitting to Wiley journals. The one tool that I'm using the most in the kitchen is actually my espresso machine. I've been making more coffees, probably too many coffees in the last couple of months. I haven't had a single coffee at a New York coffee shop. So I would say that that's the one thing that I'm using the most.
Wonderful. Thank you, Alberto. Next, Iratxe, I think, is Iratxe still with us? Maybe dropped off temporarily. So let's move on to Neil for now.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thanks, Chris, and thanks, Alberto, and to everyone who's joined today. Yeah, a bit about myself. Performed different roles in scholarly publishing over the years. Worked with Mostguard, Blackwell, Wiley, Nature Publishing Group, University of California Press, and in different capacities. But a lot of it has been around, or was around, journals. Also a bit around clinical solutions, and then of course around business development and in particular sort of scoping new products and always sort of like trying to map what's coming around the corner. I'm now with UNSILO, and of course, full disclosure, UNSILO, those of you who may not know, was acquired by Cactus, the organizer of this meeting, a few months back. And UNSILO is sort of now the AI solutions provider arm at Cactus. My favorite kitchen utensil, there are actually quite a few, but I would say the Dutch oven, right? So when I've been able to get my hands on flour, which has been surprisingly difficult, I've been using the New York Times recipe for no-knead bread, and it's fantastic. And then when I've been out of flour, I've been doing a lot of like stews and whatever I could sort of think of cooking up in that Dutch oven. So that's probably my new favorite tool. It's very heavy, but it's a bit annoying in a small kitchen, but it makes perfect bread.
Wonderful. Thank you, Neil. I think, Iratxe, are you online? We've lost the video, but you're still there with audio, I think. There she is. Let me go back to your slide, Iratxe.
Okay, so, sorry about that. I'm having some trouble with the camera, but I'll keep at it. Can you hear me?
That's fine. Yes, we can hear you. Can you just introduce yourself and tell us about your favorite kitchen utensil?
Sure. Well, thank you so much for the invitation to participate in this, as we all get accustomed to a new form of working. So I'm Iratxe Puebla. I am Associate Director at ASAPbio. I recently joined ASAPbio. My role there will be working to foster awareness of preprints, encouraging a productive use of preprints in the life sciences. And I will also have a focus on community engagement, where, for example, we've recently launched a new ASAPbio Fellows program. Before that, I had a career as an editor, working mostly with open access publishers, originally with Biomed Central, and then I joined PLOS, where most recently I was involved with their journal PLOS One. Before that, my background is I have training as a biochemist and worked in the lab for several years. In terms of the kitchen gadget, I don't know if this counts, but I'll use this nonetheless. At my daughter's recent birthday, she decided that given that we are in lockdown, she didn't want a fancy birthday present, and actually she requested some pancakes, but wanted us to be creative. So I guess my anecdote is that we used quite a few colorings, and she got to eat purple and turquoise pancakes for her birthday.
Fantastic. Thank you, Iratxe. So we had to prepare a little slide about what we will cover in this session. Now, this session's intended to be more conversational maybe than others. Hopefully, a lot of the time will be spent not looking at slides, but speaking with each other and answering your questions. But to give you a flavor about what kind of things we'd like to cover, we're looking at the confluence of preprints, peer review, and AI. How in the short term, the coming together of these three elements could be advantageous to journals, but also exploring what may happen in the not too distant future when preprints become more popular, when perhaps their presence on preprints servers is mandated. What role do manuscript submission systems and tracking systems play here? And then another kind of leap of the imagination is that at the same time AI is advancing to the point where it will be able to move beyond language and structure assessments of manuscripts and start to look at elements of the content of a paper and start to evaluate those. So if we think about that as a validation step for manuscripts, what does that mean for review and by extensions for journals and societies? I won't go into everything here because some of that will be covered in our conversation. So without any more ado, let's start. I'm going to set the scene here. I think I've got like maybe 15 slides, so I'm not going to spend ages on them. I just wanted to start with one of my favorite quotes, which is from Mr. Bill Gates, who says, "We always overestimate the change that will occur in the next 2 years and underestimate the change that will occur in the next 10. And certainly if you think back 10 years and then maybe another 10 years, you can appreciate that there is some element of truth in this. And yet we always seem to be overly optimistic about what might happen in the short term. And certainly in a field like scholarly communication, which seems to be very resistant to change and very slow moving at times, then I think this is a quote which is worth bearing in mind. So you might have got a flavor of where we're coming from here. Now, I don't want to suggest that AI is going to take over the world. I strongly believe AI is a great way for us to augment human capacity, human intelligence. It's not a way, at least as far as I can see, it's not a way to replace humans. There's no way we can have a element of nuance, let's say, when we are discussing the relative merits of a manuscript if you're simply using AI, at least right now anyway. So this presentation and this conversation is not meant to be the rise of the robots and we're going to remove humans from the whole process of evaluating manuscripts, and you'll be able to have a manuscript rejected by AI. That's not what we're aiming for here. What we're aiming for is to see where AI can help editors and editorial office staff in speeding up the process, making it more transparent, and hopefully, because we're speeding it up, also making it more scalable as well. So I've tried to avoid using this word, unprecedented, but of course we are very much living in unprecedented times. And this has had quite a few effects even within the world of scholarly communication. So what's been unprecedented recently, and I am using a ASAPbio slide here. What has been unprecedented recently is the growth in the popularity of manuscripts being submitted to preprint servers. So we can imagine why that is. There is a lot of interest in preprint servers because of the fact that researchers can get their work out quickly. They can also be fairly confident that it is being disseminated to the people who need to see it. But at the same time, any member of the public who wants to read this will be able to. There's no subscription wall for them to have to climb over. So maybe the very unfortunate incident of a pandemic has opened up our eyes to the fact that, hey, scholarly communication can be quick and it can be free of charge to the reader, that is. But we knew that before. We just needed a kick, maybe, for us to appreciate it and to see it in action. So we would think that this explosion in preprints would be good for journals, right? So I think something like 4,000 manuscripts mentioning COVID-19 have been submitted to preprint servers since the start of the year. And if I was a journal publisher, I'd be thinking, oh, wow, that's great. All those articles are going to come my way. Now, that might be true. It might not be true. The world of preprints has been a source of interest for journal editors for quite a while. And another disclosure point, this is a product I worked on, which indexes preprint servers and funnels them to journal editors based on the aims and scope of that particular journal. So preprints has always been a rich hunting ground for editors, but it's always been a little bit of a problem of how do you get the manuscripts, at least from the publisher's point of view, how do you get the manuscripts from the preprint servers to the journals? Now, some preprint servers are addressing that directly. So we've got an example here from the bioRxiv, who allow authors to transfer their preprints straight to journal submission systems. So everything's pretty rosy for journal publishers, right? So I don't think so. We are starting to get used to freely available content. We're starting to get used to immediate dissemination. And those things are one of the key factors that make preprints so popular right now. And journals are having problems with one of their key distinguishing criteria, which is validation via peer review. So you wouldn't have to go far on Twitter with the search term peer review before you find authors complaining about various different elements of the review process, how it takes long. In this case, this one was 4 years. I think that's a bit extreme, but it's not unusual to hear about the process taking a year or more. And the problem's exacerbated by the fact that more and more manuscripts are being prepared and submitted to journals, which means that we have to find more and more reviewers to evaluate those manuscripts, and there's only a finite pool, whereas it seems the amount of manuscripts being prepared each year is forever growing. So there's increased pressure on reviewers, and they, even if they want to, they don't have the time to review everything that they're asked to review. So there's a slight problem there. And then if you look at what does a journal have to do, these were 4 points which were raised 350 years ago, and it's worth re-evaluating them now. So the points are, it's an opportunity for the author to claim the work, to put their stake in the sand. It's validation or certification, usually by peer review, that the research was conducted properly and that readers can trust what they are reading. It's a way to disseminate the work to the people who want to read it. And it's a way to archive the work for scientists of the future. There were some additional points here around navigation, and in practice, journals must also be affordable and publish in a timely manner to be of any use. So if you look through those points there and you imagine your average preprint server, the one that I think all of those points are addressed to a greater or lesser degree, except perhaps the second one, which is certification. So let's just think about a world where all articles are available on preprint servers. So there was a proposal last year called Plan U, where it was proposing that if all funding agencies were to mandate the posting of preprints, then free access to the world's scientific output for everyone would be achieved with minimal effort. Now, maybe proposing that in 2019 was helpful, but I think proposing it in 2020 would have had made this come into effect a lot more quickly. Moreover, the existence of all articles as preprints would create a fertile environment for experimentation with new peer review and research evaluation initiatives, which would benefit from a reduced barrier to entry because hosting and archiving were already covered. So that's a fascinating glimpse into what may happen in the future. I think it probably will at some point, but it isn't the case right now. But let's just assume most of the world's submissions to journals actually originate on preprint servers. So why is it that only the publishers or societies who want to experiment with a way to validate these manuscripts? So there's another service here, which I'm sure Iratxe will mention later, which is Reimagine Review, which is looking at experimental models for review and validation of academic manuscripts. And these come through a combination of journals and third-party providers. So a question I've added in here is, how would we imagine automating this as far as is practicable? So there are lots of automated manuscript assessments available today, but these normally just focus on things like language and structure and not really the content of the document, and certainly not the research content of a document. But it would be unusual indeed if the growth of natural language processing, machine learning, AI ignores this. So in 10 years' time, we can imagine there will be a way to evaluate not only structure and language, but also the content of manuscripts. And it's not something that is a long way off. The building blocks to this are already being assembled. So there are already various services which look at elements of the content of a manuscript as well as structure, and look at things for errors and reproducibility. There's something I've missed off on here, which is image manipulation. So if it's possible to do all that now, what will it be possible to do in the future? I created this slide to visualize some of this. I called it the peer review validation continuum, which is at one extreme, no review and no screening, and at the other end, multiple human evaluations of the entirety of a manuscript. And there are various points along this which exist now. So no review, elementary screening, that would be most preprints, I would suggest. Full manuscript assessment for structure, language, and semantics, but not content. That's some of the more advanced manuscript assessment tools that exist today. I'm talking about something between that and full multiple human evaluation. Is there space in scholarly communication for an evaluation of structure, language, semantics, and as much of the content as it is reasonable to evaluate? So I'm going to stop there with these slides, and I'm going to invite each of my panelists to think about preprints and review and AI and how it could impact journals and societies over the next 5 years. And we'd be very interested in your particular viewpoints. So I'll start with you, Alberto, if that's okay. You've seen there some of my thoughts about how this could transpire in the next 5 to 10 years, maybe. Can you tell me how you see some of this evolving?
Yeah, thank you. So first off, I should say, as I said before, my background is in astrophysics and computer science. And I think that Plan U has informally been in place for physics, astronomy, and computer science for the last 20 years or so, because I truly don't remember one single time in which I submitted an article to a journal before actually preprinting it on the archive. So we do have some disciplines that we can look at, and as an example for ways through which preprinting has actually been working, and it's very wildly popular. At the same time, I think that if you look at preprints overall, we should also bear in mind that despite the pandemic, is really amplifying and magnifying the way through which the exposure for researchers to preprints. At the same time, I think it's still, the amount of preprints we get is still like relatively small. So we need to think of ways in which, peer review AI in preprints, but preprints are still a rather small portion of all the content that is submitted through journals. The reason I'm saying that is that because I was mentioning before the under review workflow that we just started 6 months ago at Wiley. And we're putting preprint as an option in front of authors that are submitting to 37 journals at the moment that are in the pilot. And right now, the opt-in rate is between 35 and 40%. So there's still about 60% of authors that even if they're given an option to automatically create a preprint, and there's some level of automation and AI involved in the process, they're still deciding not to preprint their work. So that's an interesting part, that preprints are very common and are rising in popularity, but at the same time, they're only taking just a slice, a section of the potential corpus of knowledge that is being produced and submitted by authors. And one last point that maybe I should make is around the actual topic of today's conversation, around the sort of convergence and intersection of AI. Ooh. Can you still hear me? I'm getting like messages from the. Yeah, you can. Okay. So I believe that AI is a good thing in the short term, as your notes, and I think that AI is also a good thing in the long term. Honestly, at the end of the day, it will enhance the way by which journals are doing peer review. It's already enhancing in a number of ways how journals are doing peer review, and it can only improve and augment the way that we do peer review. I have a few other comments around the logistical aspect and the more how AI can actually augment peer review. But I think that overall, I'm fairly optimistic that this will not necessarily, in other words, that the work of publishers and journals doesn't just boil down to chasing human peer reviewers, and that automation can definitely augment and help that we do peer review.
Iratxe, can I turn to you next? Can you respond to some of the issues that were raised maybe in those slides and also with what Alberto said?
Mm-hmm. I have to say I agree with quite a bit of what Alberto has mentioned. I guess the thinking about preprints and all of the tools that we have available, I see a lot of benefits in both of those for journals, both short and mid-term. So in terms of the element that the preprints bring, is that they provide this ability to decouple some of the journal, the roles that the journal is fulfilling at the moment, which you refer to in some of the slides. They are a very, I would say, attractive way for dissemination of research, at least for some communities. Again, in the physics disciplines, they've been doing this for a very long time. It gives control back to the authors as to when they want to share their work. It gives more visibility, given that they are made publicly available. It can reduce some of this pressure on speed potentially at the journal process, in the sense that essentially the work is out there. If you want to then in parallel in the journal provide this certification, the validation through peer review, you can do that in parallel while allowing the time and the space for that specialized evaluation. So I think that preprints and journals provide complementary processes and opportunities. In terms of the tools, I think that it will be an interesting thing to follow in the coming years, because I think they are valuable both for the preprint service as well and for journals. So on the preprint side, as we were discussing, we have seen quite an uptake related to the coronavirus pandemic. But what we are seeing as well is that there is quite a bit of an influx in papers to a smaller set of preprint servers compared to the amount of journals out there. So it can be valuable to have tools that allow filtering through that content at the preprint servers as well, so there can be value for readers or even for authors if they were to tag their papers in a certain way that allowed them to be discoverable to specific audiences. For the journals, I think that short term, one of the key advantages is that I feel that the editorial processes as we have them now have become more complex as the papers themselves have increased in complexity. And we have a number of steps and checks done at journals that actually do not relate necessarily to the specialized scientific content, where you do need the expert reviewers' commentary. But there is now this expectation for rigor, and again, in terms of industry standards, to do these additional technical checks, perhaps ethical checks, elements related to, as you were referring earlier, image checks, image screening, checking for text overlap. And these are elements that I believe journals have incorporated into their process as part of the broader certification workflow. But actually, you could potentially decouple from what an expert peer reviewer needs to do with a paper in terms of their evaluation, and somehow compartmentalize those checks with using the tools that allow to scale them in a much easier fashion, and also allowing for better consistency in the handling of the checks. Again, peer reviewers often are not equipped necessarily to perhaps dig into potential image manipulation issues. I mean, we ask them to evaluate whether the science is correctly done, the methodology is correct, the conclusion supported. So there are a number of benefits in leveraging what the technology can provide for some of those checks that could be then scaled as part of the journal workflow potentially, or perhaps in different ways. There may be new services that develop, while keeping the reviewer time, which, as you were mentioning, is finite and there is a bit of a bottleneck in resources, but keeping that reviewer time to the actual specialized assessment of scientific content that does require their input. So I think there is quite a few advantages short term, and what we may see in the future is, again, this expansion of those tools. But potentially, I think it will take probably quite a few years, because for some of these, there is still at the pilot stage. So we are probably going to see more of those tools validated for some of those checks and implemented at a higher scale, and then perhaps the beginning of some others later on.
Thanks, Iratxe. Neil, can I bring you in now? We've heard a few different viewpoints there. Would you like to comment on where we are right now, do you think, with AI and manuscript evaluation?
Yeah. So unfortunately, there's nothing that has been said that I disagree with. So I can't, there's no drama there. And I think I keep sort of thinking of one of your, I think it was your very first slide, right? The Bill Gates quote, about the 2 versus the 10 years. We overestimate the short term, and we underestimate the long term. And I think we're seeing something. We will see something similar when it comes to AI in the world of review or validation or certification, whatever we want to call this process of evaluating content. I think we'll see plugged in at different places, right? What we're seeing now with journals and preprints is that the world used to be quite binary, right? You submitted to a journal, you got accepted, you got rejected, you tried another one, and you just sort of hit repeat on the process. And of course, what we're seeing now is that things are extending, right? So that validation process, I have something that I want to share with someone, is moving outside of journals, right? There's also been conversations about doing, post-publication review. Generally, just say there's an extension. So the natural consequence would be that we will need to be able to validate content along that continuum, right? And there will be different things that we will justify doing at different parts of that sort of validation journey for some findings. I think many of those things that AI can help us with aren't necessarily in the decision-making area, right? It's not, to your point about the robots taking over the world, it's not an AI coming in and saying, yeah, this goes out, this goes in. If we look at the tools that are available today, and if we look at some of the tools that I know or others may also know are coming or are in development, they're really decision support tools, right? They are being designed, they're intended to say, hey, there's a lot of things that need to be considered in sort of the review or the validation or the checking or the screening of a piece of content. And those requirements are ever growing, right? It's never been as complex as it is now. And there's no reason to believe that the checking of a manuscript isn't going to be even more complex 2 to 10 years from now. And so I don't imagine that we're going to see something where the AI is going to come in and say, accept, reject. That's not what this is about. It's about going in and saying, hey, there's so many things that need to be checked here. There are some of those analyses that need to be run where automation software can help a person assess the material faster, right? And that's something that will need to happen anyway because of the growth of content and because of the extension of the continuum, right? There's going to be so much more content that needs to be checked. There's going to be increasing demands on, how much something is checked. It's easy enough to say, well, right now a preprint is only checked this much. But if we've learned anything from human behavior, right, I think we can rest assured that people are going to expect that preprints are checked more than they are now, increasingly. And there'll need to be transparency around that. And it's these types of things that AI can help with. There are many things it can help with. It cannot help with in review, right? And I was looking just before the call, I was going in and reading various reviewer instructions in journals. You have here are the types of things we want you to answer, right? And there are lots of things in there that I don't think an AI would be able to answer, right? It would be able to give you some indications, but ultimately a person would need to make that determination, right? Do the data and analysis fully support the claims? If not, what other evidence is required? Well, we can help you with a literature search, but we are very far away from an AI being able to make that type of determination, right? And it's a standard sort of question in review process. Are details of the methodology sufficient to allow the experiments to be reproduced? Well, we can run some reports and we can give you some indications of its reproducibility. We can flag some things that look completely out of whack, but ultimately a person needs to make that determination.
Yeah.
So I think with many of these things, it's really about decision support. It's not about taking power away from people. It's actually more to say, hey, the amount of information that needs to be checked is ever growing. We know output is growing. There's going to be preprints as well. It's not realistic to scale this in a traditional sense. There just are not enough people with enough time around to do this.
Sure. So indeed, in the short term, I also see AI as being a way to help streamline both the processes of the editorial office in kind of triaging articles as soon as they're submitted, but also further downstream with the reviewers, where we say, hey, we'd like you to review this article, but we've already done some automated checks on XYZ. We only want you to look at ABC, and because these are the gray areas, or these are the areas that we haven't even looked at, these are the things we maybe shouldn't even be looking at. And also as well, it's interesting, isn't it, that almost, I'm not going to say almost all, but the vast majority of articles which are submitted to preprint servers eventually find a home on a journal. So there's still something of value there to authors. What I was trying to imagine, though, was at some point in the future, maybe 10 years, we're going to need to address this kind of explosion in manuscripts, and we can't necessarily expect all authors to wait a year or 6 months to get the reviews in. So is there a way we can speed up the allocation of reviewers and streamline what we ask of them? That's the first question. And then the second one is there a way we can make public some of these evaluations that we've done upfront and not have that as a replacement for review, but have that as some kind of pre-validation marker that this manuscript's been analysed, it's been found to be good with language, the experiment seems to be well designed, the statistics are in order. You just have to make your, caveat lector. Sorry, you have to evaluate it knowing this. I think the advantage there is just with scale and transparency and immediacy. And it's not that it would replace human review, it would be an intermediate on the way to full human review, which personally I think might be a way to allow this current explosion of manuscripts to be immediately disseminated, and for readers to have some degree of surety that it's not complete bunkum what they're reading. Is there any sense that there may be something between no review and a full human peer review with 3 reviewers that might be valuable? Because in my eyes, if that was immediate and transparent and could be applied to all manuscripts submitted to a preprint server, I think that's something of interest. I don't know if any of you have any.
I can make a quick point if you like. I on your second point, I should say that what I see is that there's a potential for multiple layers of review, and some of those layers will come from automation. You know, for example, with under review, we are lucky because all of the preprints that we get, and we've had 3,000 preprints in the last 5 months, they are subject already to a submission checklist by the editor. And some of them even go through review, but then they get rejected. But those reviews are essentially lost, because then, you know, if the article doesn't get accepted, we have a potential to get those automated as well as manual reviews to be part of the preprint and inject some of the sort of journal impact with inside the preprint. And I think that there's a lot of value there. On your first point around the lack of reviewers, I should say that another amazing opportunity for automation is to actually use it to review artifacts that are not manuscripts and articles and traditional papers, that are produced by researchers, data, code, protocols. And I think automation is an amazing way to actually apply some of these AI techniques on top of materials that are now considered supplementary material, but that I think it's rather fundamental material. So it's a little crazy that researchers are producing all of these artifacts, but then they have to somehow squeeze them inside a Word document. And then now we're using AI to extract semantics, meaning, and rigor, and rank this manuscript. So we can also do something in screening those materials ahead of time using automation. And I think that there would be a lot of value in that.
Cool. We have, unfortunately, just about 7 minutes left. So I'm going to address some of the questions that we've had come in through the chat box here. And the first one's from Megan Phelan. She says, if researchers are posting a preprint and then publishing the same at a journal, what are they saying about visibility at the point of preprint versus at the point of a journal publication? How does this alter in audience type and the size of the visibility? I don't know if anyone wants to have a go at that one.
Sure, just some brief comments. It is true that many papers that are posted as preprints then eventually go on to be published as journals. I think one of the elements to consider in terms of visibility is that the preprint allows a channel that is much more rapid than the peer-reviewed journals. Even right now, where every journal is working very hard to fast-track their peer review, we are talking of a scale of weeks for the paper to be ready to go through peer review and preparation for publication. Where at the preprints, the scale is more in days. It does allow potentially authors to get some feedback in parallel to the peer review process. And in fact, some journals are even interested in looking at what's the commentary on preprints to see if that's something that they can bring into as part of the information pool that they use for their editorial decision. So I think they are complementary in terms of the visibility that they provide to the authors. And again, the speed element is there. And then again, depending on which journal they publish in, the fact that the preprint is made publicly available.
Okay, great, thank you. Neil, do you have
just two quick comments, right? I think like staring into a crystal ball, I think we'll start to think more of preprint versus journal article more as here's a research finding or the beginnings of a research finding or some small bits that undergo some checks, and over time it evolves, and at different stages in that evolution it undergoes some other checks, right? And so maybe the difference between the preprint and the journal is, one, you get the journal badge, right? That's a big sort of cadeau for, you've been accepted by this journal. It's almost becomes a journal club. Of course, you get the reviewers as well, even though there are now experiments like with eLife, right, putting full reviews at the preprint level. And then just a quick one, the speed of journal versus preprints. Yes, we can all sort of dip into preprints now and find preprints that were, no, not preprints, journal articles that were submitted, accepted, and published in, 4, 5, 6, 7 days, because the journal, did everything in its power to get that particular paper reviewed very fast and got it, maybe published just a day later than it got posted as a preprint. But we know this is not the norm, right? This is not something that could be sustained. This is not a model for science. That type of speed, is impossible. Reviewers and editors are working incredibly hard right now to try and deal with the COVID influx of papers because it's a crisis. But that's not something that can scale. So I think after the pandemic, and I hope after, once it ends, we'll see that stretching again, right? Where things will naturally take longer if you're going to put like a qualitative review on a finding versus a preprint.
Great, thank you. I think we've got time for at least one more question. So there's a question here from Dharmesh, who says, reviewers sometimes ask questions and seek clarifications. How can an AI reviewer ensure this? I mean, it's a good question. I think perhaps the answer is maybe they can't, and maybe this is where maybe this is evidence of where humans can not be eliminated from the process of evaluating manuscripts. But if anyone else has any contrary views, please speak up.
No, I could quickly say I agree. I think what an AI can do is to say, hey, we spotted this, this, and this, and this in your manuscript. You be the judge. We can't have like a quality. It's not a chatbot that's super intelligent, right? It'll be able to spot some patterns. Some of it machine learned, some of it rules based, of things that look, out of whack with how we've told the software what things should look like, and that's about it where we are today.
And then finally, there's a question from Phil here, which says, perhaps there could be value in having screening badges on preprints that show automated tests, that show the automated tests that have been run. I think we're starting to see that become more popular. Alberto, I don't know if you have screening badges.
We're about to add screening badges based on the type of screening that is performed on preprints. As I said, I think there's an interest in injecting the preprints with some of the sort of editorial screenings that are done, whether they're done automatically or not. And as Neil was mentioning, bioRxiv is experimenting with that with the eLife pilot, for example. And I see that happening more and more. Just one last thing, putting my publisher hat on for a second, which is a new hat for me, by the way. I think that the previous question showed the value of publishers as well, right? In handling cases that are not easy to handle through AI. And there's also cases in which research integrity or ethical problems actually enter the sort of review component, and those are hard sometimes to really manage them in an automated way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so both Iratxe and I have served with COPE, and there's a lot of hard problems that come across our desk there that no way is AI going to help there. Unfortunately, just as we were starting to hit our stride, we're going to have to stop, I'm afraid. It's been a pleasure to have you all with us this afternoon. And I want to thank you on behalf of the audience. I want to thank you on behalf of myself as well. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening and for your interesting questions. And thank you to my co-panelists. And I'm going to hand over now to Donald Samulak, who is going to close the conference for us.